Three, two, one. You're tuning into the Let's Walk podcast. I am your host, brother Adnan, joining me all the way from the US, and I'm very happy to have him on the podcast. He'll be sharing his journey through medicine and what's next for him and whatnot. So, Assalamu alaikum, Adnan. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, I wanted to start off with what gave you the initial spark that I want to be a doctor, or I want to go in this field.
Okay, so I think my initial kind of introduction to medicine grew naturally through, I think a lot of us share a kind of appreciation for science and helping people. And over the years, through just like interactions with, seeing things on shows with like family, with experiences volunteering in like hospitals or places like that, it kind of refined more of that love for science and also helping people, and showed me how I could use applied science to helping people directly in the context of medicine, which was a great way to not just learn about and enjoy science and understand it on a deep level, but apply it, and not just apply it to just random things in the environment, but apply it to humans, which are like the most interesting, things around us. So over time, I think just exploring different options and working in a research lab, working at an underserved clinic, or volunteering in a hospital, it kind of refined more of the specifics of what kind of practice I wanted to be in terms of being in medicine, and then even in terms of practicing all aspects of medicine. So it led me to family medicine in particular.
Wow, that's interesting. I just want to know, like, how did you decide that, family medicine is for me? Because you see, like, you can go into so many avenues, right? You can go into internal medicine, you can go into surgery and whatnot. So, do you feel like you're missing out on something?
Yeah, I think with any specialty, you're always making a decision, and with any choice in life, I guess you're making a decision where you're gonna gain some benefit and then miss out on something else. But with family medicine, it felt the most comprehensive, and while in the past you had a little bit more power or authority as a family medicine physician, you still do have considerable power, and it's probably the specialty that lets you be the most involved in the most of medicine that you possibly can. That's actually the reason why I ended up choosing family medicine, because I was able to do some small procedures like sew up some small lesions, lac repairs, do some small excisions and things like that, even like nail removals and things. Some family medicine doctors even do colonoscopies and endoscopies or other procedures as well. And you pretty much address pathologies from the entire body. Whereas if you go into any other specialty, even in internal medicine, you won't be dealing with kids, for example, unless you do an IMPs fellowship or a residency. So family medicine really gives you the most breadth that you can in medicine, and it's almost a way to not make as much of a choice in your specialty, because you're able to make a choice to do everything, and then later on you can refine your practice to what you really want to focus on. That being said, you do miss out if you're trying to do a lot of surgery. You can't do a lot of surgery as a family medicine doctor. If you do a fellowship in OBGYN or something, you could maybe assist with obstetric and gyne cases, in the OR, but that's probably going to be more in a rural area.
So there is room for specialty in the, what do you call that, family medicine, right?
So in family medicine, there's several different fellowships that you can do. You don't necessarily need a fellowship, but doing a fellowship will give you more opportunities, whether that's in sports medicine, in OB/GYN, in sleep medicine, which is another fellowship that you can do as a family medicine physician, and then you can do sleep studies and help with like CPAPs and all those things. And as I mentioned, each of those specialties and subspecialties or fellowships gives you a little bit more authority and roles and responsibilities in those positions. So if you do an OB/GYN fellowship, which I think is like maybe a year or two, maybe even longer, after family medicine, then you can have a little bit more privileges in the hospital, like with assisting with C-sections, for example, or things like that.
You mentioned sports medicine, right? Tell me a little bit about that. Do you deal with athletes, NFL athletes, basketball players, or like what happens over there?
Yeah, so sports medicine can be a fellowship that you pursue either on the surgical side as an orthopedic surgeon, for example, or more in the primary care side as like a family medicine or internal medicine physician. You can also pursue it as a PM&R doctor, and maybe even pediatrics. And with sports medicine, you're dealing with musculoskeletal issues, so things like tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, medial epicondylitis. You're dealing with um, sprains and strains and things like that from weekend warriors to professional athletes. Usually, a lot of the more recreational athletes can be handled with just a basic family medicine background. But if you do want to address professional athletes, a lot of even colleges or universities require a fellowship in sports medicine to work with athletes in their center. Some don't, and especially professional programs, especially in the U.S., I know do often require a sports medicine trained physician to work with their athletes. And with sports medicine, you can handle a lot of it non-operatively, and that's where a family medicine, sports medicine physician would come in. But you can also handle some things operatively. And so for those cases, if you are a family medicine or a non-surgical physician who is sports medicine trained, you would refer those patients out to an orthopedic surgeon, for example, to help with that particular issue. But a lot of issues can be handled non-operatively, and that's where you would take care of athletes and even lay people with their musculoskeletal issues to a higher degree than maybe a non-sports medicine trained physician.
That's interesting, for a person like me, or maybe somebody else who's, more sort of having a background in fitness, or maybe have a background maybe in sports, or they have been athletes. So it could be, more relatable, and, they could,
Sorry, you cut out at the end.
yeah. So I was saying that, for people who usually have a fitness background, or have a background, maybe they have been, into sports before joining med school or whatever it is, they can bring more to the table, because now they're able to relate, and they're able to understand the athlete a little bit more.
Yeah, a lot of people who end up doing a sports medicine fellowship or work more with athletes, even if they don't do a sports medicine fellowship, often come from an athletic background, which is why they like that environment. They like working with athletes. They like the musculoskeletal issues and systems because they've dealt with it themselves and they have experience with it. And like you mentioned, they can relate to athletes and other individuals better because they've had those injuries or they've been in those situations, or they even just like sports and that active environment. So it's definitely a good fit if you are into sports or fitness.
Yeah, you also mentioned sleep residency, if I'm not wrong, right? So tell us a little bit more about that.
So I'm not the most knowledgeable about this specialty, but it's a subspecialty actually. Sleep medicine is an important area that deals with sleep issues. A lot of people have sleep apnea, for example, and for those physicians that treat that and who do a fellowship in that subspecialty, you can do it either through neurology or family medicine and probably some other ones as well. But basically, you learn how to deal with sleep issues, as the title suggests. So you'd be conducting sleep studies in a lab, for example, and you can even make considerable part of your practice, or even most of your practice, that if you wanted to. And so you'd be running sleep studies, you'd be reading, the brain waves and all those things like that. And you'd be helping to prescribe, CPAP and things like that for patients and help with their different issues.
Talking about sleep apnea, I need to interrupt over here. Tell us, like, there's this myth going on, right? That if you do neck curls, that you get sleep apnea. I want you to clear this thing, or is
Oh,
it
I,
like true, or what does it take?
I don't know if I can, if I have the authority right now to speak on that. So I'll pass for now. We might need to have a sleep specialist on, who's an
Okay.
expert in that to talk about it. Yeah.
So I want to know, how has med school changed you, or taught you something as a person? Like, how have you changed as a person along these years?
So I think medical school, as with any challenging experience, it pushes you to learn how to handle a bigger or tougher, more challenging workload. And for that, it requires you to grow in terms of your ability to handle stress, to grow more flexible, to develop more organizational skills, and overall to become kind of a better version of yourself in different regards like this, whether it's with stress management, with organization, with understanding how well you studied, adapting new techniques, and learning from others who are better than you or more experienced than you. And so overall, not necessarily specific to medical school, but anything really challenging. I'm sure law school has similar um, adaptations that occur as you go through it. But with medical school, as it is a very challenging kind of field, it teaches you to really grow and become a better version of yourself, and to always, in addition to that, to always be pushed to continuously have a sense of wanting to learn and grow, because as a clinician, you're never going to know everything, and you realize at each stage, after you complete a stage, that you really still don't know almost anything. You just know a little bit more than previously. So you're continuously pushed to learn and grow, whether it is in terms of your organizational skills, your stress management, or even in terms of your clinical knowledge or your thirst for knowledge. It just continuously pushes you to grow and learn and have that desire to learn and passion for learning. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from medical school, probably.
So I'm just curious, like you said, that the more you learn, you feel like, there's a little more I've learned, but, still you don't know. So how do you deal with, like, when you're on rounds or, you're dealing with patients? Do you feel like, I still don't know, should I,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that imposter syndrome in medicine, or that feeling that like you're not where you're supposed to be, or you don't know what's happening. And through each stage, as you can use, everyone's really working hard and they go through it and they feel those feelings even when they're even really experienced. But over time, you realize that little by little, even though you feel like you don't know anything, you start remembering facts or data, or you remember um, how to diagnose a patient, or you start treating them, and over time you have those small wins and you start realizing that it's not that you don't know anything, but you do know a lot and you are growing and you are learning things. There may be pieces that you don't know, and over time there'll be less and less that you don't know. But um, I think there's just a effect, the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think it's called, where initially people don't know what they don't know, so they just feel that they know a lot. But over time, you realize the things that you don't know, and I think that's what you're really going through when you're going through the stages of medicine. You just become more and more aware of the things that you don't know, but in reality, you still do know a lot of information. And as long as you're really working hard and making sure you're doing your best, usually if you've gotten to medical school and you're passing, each of these exams, you do have the required knowledge to go through each of these steps, and you are in a good position. You are doing well. You just have to be patient and understand your strengths and your weaknesses, know where you are lacking, and always make sure, to keep the patient in a safe place. But trust yourself and know that you are progressing at an ample rate for wherever you're at, as long as you're, passing all your tests and meeting expectations. So I think there's a balance between not being overly confident and being careful, but also being confident enough that if you've been passing your tests, you've been progressing as expected. You do know the right amount of knowledge for each stage, and you'll find over time that you do know more and more of what's going on. You do diagnose a little bit better, and you do know how to treat better over time as the years and months and decades go on.
That's a nice point you mentioned, like having the small wins, and that builds up confidence, and then slowly you'll figure out, no, that I know the stuff. And I mean, like, not necessarily know all the stuff, but have a little bit more confidence with dealing with patients and whatnot. So I want you to tell a little bit, about your program and how it was at your medical school, so that people can know back here.
Okay, so well, I'm from California, so we had more of a traditional curriculum where in the US, the way things are done is you go through high school up to grade 12, and then you go into undergraduate study, which is 4 years, and then traditionally you'll go on to medical school, which is another 4 years after taking your MCAT exam, and you apply and interview and things like that, and then you hopefully you get in. And after 4 years, you and taking a couple of board exams, step one, step one, USMLE, step one, USMLE, step two, CK and CS, you end up applying for and interviewing at residency programs, and then you'll do residency for 3 to 5 years, depending on your specialty, and then you'll do fellowships after that if you want subspecialization in another field or a couple of fields for a couple of years more, depending on how many fellowships you want to do. And so I do have a traditional program where it's 2 years of medical school that's didactic based, where you're in class learning about foundational sciences in your first year, and your second year is more pathologies, going through different organ systems and cycling through those, like hematology, oncology, cardiovascular system, the kidney or the nephrology aspect of things, urology, things like that. And then the third year is usually a clinical rotation year where you do have your core clinical clerkships. So that's going to be general surgery, pediatrics. Some places have neurology, some don't. Um, OBGYN, family medicine, internal medicine, psychiatry, and I might be missing, or emergency medicine, and I might be missing one or two. But you have like about several, maybe 7 to 9 different core clerkships in your third year. And then usually after that, you in the summer between your third and fourth year, you apply to residency spots. You do your sub internship as well. And your fourth year is where you have electives, and electives are, as the name suggests, electives in things that you'd like as well as things that you need. Usually, some will be dedicated to your specialty, and some will be dedicated to other non-specialty electives in areas that you don't necessarily need, but are good for your overall clinical development or just your interest. And during your fourth year, you'll also not just take your Step 2 CK, but you'll also NCS, but you'll also apply for residency spots. And usually around March in the US at least, and I think maybe even the rest of the world, I'm not sure, is where you find out where you get into. For us, it's going to be actually tomorrow on the 19th for the day we're filming. Um, and then you do residency. And again, if you're going to do residency, then you apply to fellowship near the end of your residency. But if you don't, then you end up going into the workforce and working as a full doctor.
That's a long process, you know.
Yeah, very long. Yeah, I wish they sped it up over here, but over here, overseas, they do the 6 years of med school, but over here they do the 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, and then residency.
Is there a way that, they have like merged both the degrees, undergraduate and med school? Have you heard of
Yeah,
that? I
yeah.
mean,
There's only, unfortunately, there's only a couple programs in the U.S. that do that. There's very few. And they do have 6 year combined programs, but um, it's not very common. It's hard to get into. You have to really know what you're getting into early on and be very competitive to apply to those spots usually. So it can be done, but it's just very hard, and you have to have foresight even when you're like early in high school to try to apply to those programs because they are very limited and probably more competitive than a lot of these other programs. And most people don't even know about them because they're so rare. So it can be done, but it's very rare here, unfortunately.
yeah, because um, the thing, like I said, like even law school has in India, basically, you can directly go after high school. But the thing is, you have to do a dual degree. So it's like either you do BBA, that's Bachelor's in Business Administration, alongside law school. So it's like an intensive program. It's rigorous and it's hard to get into, like you said. And I want you to tell us about, there's also DO, right? Usually
Yeah.
people, always debate between MD and DO. I want you to share a light upon that.
So the MDDO debate, I think previously in previous generations, there's a little bit more of a split. Nowadays, I think the a lot of the accreditation bodies are like combining or something like that, and like the hospital systems are more combined. In terms of MD and DO, they're pretty much the same curriculum, but the DO philosophy has a little bit more emphasis on things like OMM or OMT, which is osteopathic manipulative medicine, osteopathic manipulative techniques. And there's different areas of this. I didn't go to a DO program, so I'm not the most familiar with all the different areas, but there's like the lymphatic system, I think, and musculoskeletal and other things like that. But they have different techniques that they do with their hands, basically, that are supposed to help provide therapy to patients in a different way. There's been mixed evidences about a lot of these things, and some areas aren't very well researched, from my understanding. But overall, it's basically similar to the MD program, plus they have the OMM side of things. In terms of practical use, there's supposed to be more of a holistic approach. I think a lot of MD programs are still holistic though, so I would highly recommend if you can get into, in order of practicality of getting into a program to be a physician, I would highly recommend you try and get into well, if you are in America or you're trying to be in America, try to be in, or you're trying to practice in America long term, I would say I'd highly recommend you try to be on mainland US MD program, then a DO program, and then a Caribbean MD program. Since I believe the accreditation or the hospitals are combined, I could be wrong again, over the last couple of years, there isn't necessarily um, as much of a difference like I mentioned. There is unfortunately still a bias towards MDs into getting into more competitive specialties. They do tend to be a little bit more prestigious. They do tend to be a little bit better funded. They do tend to have more extensive research centers if you're trying to do research and things like that. And they do have a little bit higher prestige. They are also a bit more competitive, which is why there's still a little bit of that bias still left, where it's easier to get into a DO program in terms of average stats and like MCAT GPA scores and things like that. But you still can get into competitive programs. I've interviewed for my YouTube channel anesthesiologists and other surgeons even who've gone to DO programs and got into competitive specialties. So it still can be done, but it's just a little bit harder if you go to a DO program. And there's also that stigma still a little bit that's still pervasive in the community, whether it's doctors or non-medical professionals or just like the public in general. So there's a little bit of that, which isn't as big of a problem now, but it's still persistent. So that could be another reason why you choose MD as well. But I think overall, it's probably better to do MD mainland, as I mentioned. And then you didn't necessarily ask me to talk about like foreign MDs or Caribbean MDs, for example, but being overseas, especially a Caribbean MD school, it tends to be harder to get in due to one, just even thriving in the environment's more difficult. If you're in a Caribbean MD school, there's often hundreds of individuals, very high attrition rates. It's usually very expensive. And it's often hard to get a residency in the US unless you're doing primary care like internal medicine or family medicine or things like that. So getting to a competitive program can be done, but it's going to be a lot harder if you are in a Caribbean school. But yeah, overall, it's getting more and more similar to the MDDO programs. I would still recommend going to the MD program if you can. But besides the OMM training, it's pretty much the same.
You mentioned that during fourth year there is going to be electives, right? And that's where you do sub internships. So I want to know, how do you manage studying, doing internships, making content for YouTube, calligraphy, fitness, and I don't know how many things you do. Like,
Sorry, you cut off at the end, but I think I know generally what you're getting at. So I think with I guess life in general, but especially very demanding fields like medicine, you have to develop these organizational skills and prioritize and things like that. But there's always going to be, as we mentioned with choosing a specialty, even there's always things that you, when you make a choice, there's things you benefit from and things that you don't benefit from, and then you'll be hurt with. So pros and cons to everything, right? And so for me, I choose to really focus in on, certain things like, for example, like my fitness with my art and illustration, with my YouTube channel, things like that. And I have to balance those out on top of, school and my sub internship or other things like that. So there's always prioritizing, and then also choosing which things you want, prioritizing long term as well as prioritizing even within the day. So one, prioritizing within the day. If you're really busy, most people will have, some time, whether it's like 10 minutes or half an hour in the day to do something, right? Some people will choose to use that for like Netflix or, for example, or like hang out with friends. Whereas I'll maybe choose to do like work out or do some illustration or something. So I like my social life, for example, is like very poor. I don't like hang out with friends, at all really. So I probably suffered in that aspect. Whereas other people, maybe they'll use their free time to hang out with friends and things like that. But that gave me time to do that art and illustration, the calligraphy and things like that, or make like a YouTube video, for example. Relationships are another thing that I haven't really, I haven't been a part of, but like other people who are in a relationship, who have families even, or even kids, that's going to take up a lot of their free time. So not doing relationships or social stuff, saved me time in that regards. Sleeping, unfortunately, I should be sleeping a lot more, but I often sacrifice a lot of sleep so I can do more things. So that's another way I have more time. And then sometimes, so that's like prioritizing throughout the day, making sure that whatever free time that you have, you use it for what you want to do. If you don't want to make YouTube videos or do art or, learn about some topic on the side or do some hobby, then, or exercise or whatever, then maybe what you want to do is play video games or hang out with friends, whatever it is. Just make sure that you're aware of how you're spending your time, and you don't just use that time to burn, just like sitting around doing nothing and then regretting not using the time for something that you really wanted to. So that's just being mindful of time throughout the day and prioritizing your free time throughout the day. And then prioritizing long term, there are going to be periods where you're super busy and that you can't do everything that you want. So for example, if I'm working, 16 hours in a day, for example, in the operating room for some electives, when I come home, I'm probably not going to, work out for 3 hours and do art for 2 hours and make a YouTube video for 5 hours, right? I'll be sleeping like an hour. So during those really stressful periods where I don't have a lot of time, I might just go from work, come home, work out for 10 20 minutes if at all, and then just eat something, go to bed, and go into clinic the next day or the hospital the next day. So just realize that throughout your time in medicine, everything's a marathon, right? So there's going to be periods where maybe that you fall off on certain hobbies, but or different side projects, but then you build up again later on when you have more time. So what I'd recommend is keeping your high priority tasks at the center of what you're trying to do. Make sure your grades and your scores and your clinical knowledge and learning is top priority, but then slowly build onto that. And whatever you build onto, whether that's your base of medicine and then adding on exercise, then adding on your hobbies, 2 or 3 hobbies even, that will vary throughout your career in medicine, whether it's medical school or as a doctor, or even different periods as a doctor when you're on different rotations, for example, or different times of the year may be really busy. You're going to have to cut down some of those lower priority things, and then even middle priority things, and then sometimes even high priority things. So things are always going to be in flux, but you try to make the best of it and think long term. Maybe you're losing out on doing a certain project. Like sometimes there'll be periods where I haven't uploaded a YouTube video in a month, but that's because I was in a really, challenging time period in terms of medicine, and then I wanted to focus on medicine and fitness more, just my health. And YouTube wasn't as much a priority to me. But later on, when I had more time on an easier rotation, I ended up making more videos. So you have to think long game and think of prioritizing what you're doing and just be aware of how you're spending your time, whether that's in a day, when you think you don't have free time, or even when you do have free time. And just really being flexible and aware and experimenting and working out which is the best way you can get the most of what you want with what you have. It's never going to be a perfect situation, but you just try to make the best of what you can.
Talking about grades, you mentioned grades, right? So I want you to share your thoughts, as to how you studied in med school. I think there's a lot of syllabus being thrown. It's like drinking from a water hose, as they say. So how did you manage to do like do good in exams and still maintain other stuff? Because you see there's a lot of time being consumed. Time, it's like a lot, they're asking for time, right? Like a lot of activities are pulling your time at the same time. Then you have to study and everything. And how did you do that? Do you do active recall? And how do you go about it?
Yeah, I think active learning has been shown in various, in the literature and other things to be the most useful for learning. So how I like to study is I like to go through more of a passive, actually, overview of the material initially, whether that's like Boards and Beyond or Prothoma or things like that. These different resources, video resources that medical students use to get first exposure to the material, where the instructor will go through with video resources and explain, with Dr. Najib even, or other educators will go through and walk you through and explain the fine details of a subject from start to finish, more like a traditional lecture. Some students will go to class and learn that. A lot of medical schools, especially in the US, where attendance isn't mandatory, we often skip class and go to the lectures right away. After that initial pass, I like to go to a little bit more active learning, because the passive video lectures just give me kind of a foundation. I don't really take notes during this period either. I just try to absorb the information. I'll take notes if I really need to, but I don't really feel like I need to most of the time, and I feel it's inefficient. And so with after getting the basic foundation, the concepts, if there's any concepts that I'm unsure with, I'll use other resources as needed. So I'll add on like Khan Academy, or I'll add on Wikipedia, or I'll add on, different research papers, other things like that as I need. Usually medical school isn't too complicated. The material isn't so sophisticated because it's not like a PhD level in each subject. It's more of like a cursory knowledge of the subject, as long as you understand the basic fundamentals of that particular topic. The hardest part really is memorizing. And so you understand concepts, and once you understand concepts, you move on to memorization. And so with memorization, I like to use Anki as my main source of remembering facts. Along with that, I'll use Sketchy, which is a tool to remember like bacteria pathology, microbiology pathology, and pharmacology. And so I'll use that as another memory tool. Anki, if you guys don't know, is a flashcard service that's online, electronic flashcards. So you don't have to carry around thousands of cards, in your pocket or whatever. And so I use Anki to remember facts from usually the medical school subreddits on Reddit. They have a couple of free decks that you can use for each stage of your medical career, and those were very helpful. And that was great for more memorizing the fine details. And then for the most active form of learning would be using question banks, and question banks is probably the best way to learn in medical school. What I'd recommend doing is going through the question banks, going through each question, and knowing really why the right answer is right and why each of the wrong answers is wrong, and going through each question, using them as a memory tool, as a studying tool rather, as a learning tool rather than just a way to assess your knowledge. And you do this by making sure you spend time with each question and doing the kind of like the progression that I mentioned, answering the question, figuring out why the right's right, why the wrongs are wrong, and then going through your other resources as needed to figure out why, again, all of these answers are right and why all of these wrong answers are wrong as needed. So don't skip to the next question if you don't thoroughly understand each question. The question bank that's the best is going to be the UWorld question bank because they're the makers of the board exams. But there are other question banks that you can use as well, like Kaplan, USMLE, RX, Firecracker, Emboss, and other ones as well. And so that's kind of the main framework I use. I use primary video resources to learn the concepts, and then I use memorization devices like flashcards, especially Anki, and sometimes even Sketchy or things like that to help with memorization. And then the higher level active learning, that's going to be the base of my learning, and the most time that I spent is going to be doing question banks, especially UWorld.
Oh, like you mentioned, right, you don't take notes, move to more active sources of learning or active tools. Like active recall is sort of more challenging to the brain. That's what I feel, and that is what gives the initial. It generally gives off that there's going to be a lot mentally mentally taxing, and that's why I think generally people don't imply that actually back in India.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being said, I want you to, or what would you say to the first year medicine? What would you say to yourself when you are in first year?
I would say for anyone who's a first year medical student, I would say one, first of all, be very sure of what you want and try to find your niche in medicine early on. In terms of practical tips, rather, I could give something more eloquent, more motivational, but in terms of practical tips, one, find your area and niche in medicine early on, whether that's through shadowing, which I highly recommend. So find the different specialty that you want to work in and find the ideal environment that you want to work in. So for example, if you want to work in family medicine, outpatient private practice, it's good to find that early on. If you want to find, or if you shadow and figure out that you want to be an orthopedic surgeon who works in academia, you want to find that early on. And this one will give you motivation in the hard times when you feel like, you're learning a lot of stuff that you don't really want to learn, whether it's like really, whether it's too much information at one time, that fire hose analogy that you mentioned is too challenging, or it's not relevant to your interests, for example. You'll have that as motivation that at the end of it, you'll be in a place where you want to be long term. Also, it's a way for you to hone in on your overall curriculum, get research in the area that you need to, for example, build a network and connections that you want, and not get lost in the large, kind of uncertainty and sometimes gloom and depression that can be present in medicine and even as a medical student. And another thing is to realize it's a long journey, it's a marathon, and that you need to take care of yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, even. Because if you don't, you're gonna get burnt out, or you're going to really not enjoy the whole process. And every step, there's always more responsibilities and more that you have to deal with, and more problems and things like that. It's just gonna get harder and harder each time. So each step, it's important to try and enjoy it as much as you can, take care of yourself as much as you can, and think long term. If you just try and power through things when you're feeling really bad all the time and just work all the time and not enjoying any of your life or do any of your other hobbies or passions or take care of yourself, you're not going to hurting your health and burning out even, and maybe you won't even make it to the end. So as it's a long game, you need to take care of yourself. and you need to try and figure out ways to adapt to the situation to overcome it. And you will have times where maybe you feel like you're not living up to um, the standard that you have or others have, but that's a normal part of the process. There'll be times where you feel like you have everything under control. More often than not, there'll be times where you feel like you're lost or you're not doing well or you can barely catch up, but it's all part of the process. Think long term and make sure to take care of yourself and try to have fun if you can.
So every year, whenever there's a after admissions, actually back in India, um, still, we have this question coming up again and again. That there's a lot of doctors in the market. The market saturation is going high each and every year. My question to you is: do you still recommend?
Um, so in terms of job market, there's always a job market for physicians, especially if you're doing like primary care, like family medicine or internal medicine. There's never enough of those doctors. If you're trying to do a specialty or subspecialty like spinal back surgery, there's still even still a market for those physicians. You will have, as you become more and more specialized, you will have to live in more specific areas because there aren't a lot of spots for those physicians. But there's still always going to be opportunities. There's still a huge need for doctors, and there's not enough doctors. So there's going to be, at least in America, I know there's a huge dearth of doctors. We need a lot more. So there's always a job market for them, especially if you're a primary care physician. So I wouldn't. I would say job security is very high. You're not going to get like pushed out of or searching or for a job. In terms of finances, though, going to medicine isn't the best financial decision, especially in America. There's like high tuition rates. The loans that you have to take out will, for a lot of people, will have a lot of interest. For example, if you're trying to get an interest-based loan, which is what most people end up doing. Um, and the overall journey is so time demanding and long and um, so rigorous that overall the amount of time and energy you're putting in isn't worth the finances. You could go into another career, invest early, and be in a lot better place financially and have a lot more free time and things like that, a lot less stress if you go into another career. But if being a physician is what you really want to do and you do really want to do it and you can't see yourself doing anything else, and I think you will still be able to not just enjoy a career, but find a job. You shouldn't have to worry about job security.
Okay, that's some solid advice right there. How's the situation back in US? With the pandemic and everything.
So it's mixed. So there are certain states, because the U.S. is each state's a little bit different. So there's a lot of different political climates and microclimates, I guess. So some states are very stringent on rules and things like that, and there are certain states that are a lot more relaxed. I think right now, overall, some areas of the country got hit really hard, and even in California, for example, where I am, it was hit really hard in terms of hospitals. We were running out of PPE. A lot of places ran out of PPE and protective personal equipment. And then hospital beds were overflowing. Some doctors' rooms even got converted, and other rooms got converted into patient rooms, for example. And there's like overflow even in a lot of places. In some places, they had to ship outpatients to other hospitals because they didn't have room. But I think now overall that it's trending down slowly. I could be wrong, but I think the overall numbers and cases have been trending down in a lot of parts. So things are slowly maybe settling down a little bit, but sometimes you have spurts and things here and then. It's very location dependent. So certain areas will have sometimes spikes, and certain areas will be a little bit calmer. But I think overall the hospitals around here have been busy, but slowly getting to a better spot. And a little bit more of those elective cases and things like that are picking up, more like the traditional kind of normal kind of medical workflow, whereas previously it was all like telehealth and just emergent cases and things like that. It's getting a little bit more to like the normal cases now.
So, have you been working the whole time?
Fortunately for me, I've been working the whole time. I had a couple periods of dedicated where I didn't need to go into clinic because I was doing dedicated study for step 2. But besides that, I've been pretty much working the whole time. Initially, I got cut out of rotations for a couple weeks when I was doing emergency medicine and even family medicine on my sub internship. I had some light weeks because they didn't want medical students to go into on the ward side where the inpatients were because of a risk of exposure, and they didn't have enough PPE. but I wasn't affected too much. I was able to find other hospitals I could work in, so I was still able to get my clinical experience.
I saw you took the vaccine, I'm a little bit skeptical about the vaccine though. But I want you to share your experience and like how has it been?
So I'm not an expert where I've like looked through like every single study and reaction and things like that. And I don't even know if there's that much research out there on like the side effects and things like that. But for most people so far, it seems like the side effects are minimal. Usually they're localized reactions, especially after the second vaccine, where your body already has some immunity built up. So it's, their immune response is a little bit heightened, is where you'll notice things like malaise, fatigue, maybe some muscle soreness or things like that. For me, fortunately for me, I didn't really have much of a reaction to either of them. The second, both times I just had a little bit of soreness that went away within a day. The second time I had a little bit of a localized erythematous or like a red reaction where it was like a little bit reddish around my injection site, on my left arm actually, left shoulder. But yeah, both times there was just a little bit of soreness and I was pretty much fine. I know some people who felt really sick for like a day or two, especially after the second vaccine, um, and had like a fever or subclinical fever, I think, and felt really bad. But fortunately, that wasn't for me. I noticed more people that had the Moderna vaccine had that than the Pfizer ones, but even some Pfizer vaccinated individuals that I know had those as well. But overall, the side effects are minimal, and I think the goal is again to think about cost benefit as with anything, right? Um, this vaccine's been studied pretty well, but it hasn't been studied, for years, which is why a lot of people are a little bit, concerned about it or cautious about it. And I probably would have waited myself because I tend to be a cautious person, but I felt the risk for me would be better to take that possible side effect risk because I am around, sick patients all the time, and I'm around certain areas where people don't, social distance or practice, mask wearing the best. And I am sometimes around family members, who are older and things like that. So I thought, risk benefit for myself as well as others would be best for me to just take the vaccine. The side effects seem minimal, and that extra immunity would let me live more at peace with myself. And then even though I'm pretty healthy and young, it's there's always still that possibility that you get COVID, and those COVID side effects are going to be way worse or riskier than if I were to get a small localized reaction or felt bad for a day or two taking the vaccine. So that's my thought process with the vaccine. I think it's been pretty safe, especially on a large scale, and I think people should get it so we could kind of move forward.
Yeah, like you mentioned, like having family members, especially uh, older relatives or grandparents and whatnot. It sort of is a mixed situation. Like where you are interacting with patients on one end, then you have you don't want to have that. So I think now this my thought process have been a little bit impacted by, I would say, a little more open. I would say.
Mhm.
So now this brings me to the last part of the podcast. This is where I ask about life. So this called perspective questions. So what is one thing that the pandemic has taught you?
Um, so I think the pandemic has it's an interesting situation because personally for me, it hasn't. I tend to be in the house most of the time when I do have time, and then for me, because I've been in the clinic the whole time in the hospital, like it hasn't really affected me much. Um, but um, it has limited me somewhat since I can't travel, for example, in my fourth year before residency or things like that. And I think the pandemic is a reminder of, both the resilience that humans have, but also uh, the resourcefulness and the need for community, for example, especially in tough times. So it's a reminder to, check in with your loved ones, friends, family, things like that. It's a reminder to, nurture those bonds and, seek each other in times of discomfort, and how unfortunate situations can sometimes, bring us together, where it's in terms of shared experiences that you have with, friends and family or other people. I think these experiences kind of bring us together as humans and show us how we all have problems and situations and, struggles and things like that. But hard moments like this show us that, we can come together over, something over our shared differences and kind of live in more of a positive environment and support each other even in times of distress. And again, I think it speaks on our resilience as a people, how we're able to, go through challenging times and work together and help each other out, help ourselves out. And I think it's empowering in that regard, where we're able to kind of rise up above a challenge, find other ways to do our businesses, find ways to support our mental health, find ways to exercise and do fitness in other ways, for example, find ways to, again, run our business in ways that we haven't previously, to grow and adapt overall. And it's just a way that pushes us to kind of become better versions of ourselves.
I asked this question to like basically all my guests, since the pandemic started, and I twisted a little bit, to suit it to them. And every time, I get a new perspective and a new insight. And like you mentioned, the need for community, despite our differences, uh, the way our community united and, people helping each other, sending the protective equipment and whatnot, giving masks and sanitizers and whatnot. That's phenomenal. So this brings me to the second question, which is, if you were to meet three people, dead or alive, who would they be and why?
Mm. So this is difficult because I feel like there's so many different people I'd like to meet. I think one would be, in terms of a live person, would be an individual like Elon Musk, which I think a lot of people would say. One, for his intelligence, but two, because he has that entrepreneurial mindset. He has that deep knowledge in a lot of different fields. He has kind of an innovative thinking kind of perspective. So I think in terms of his different perspectives that he brings, in terms of his kind of pragmatic knowledge, as well as just like general knowledge about things, his ability to push himself and others to achieve things that, not just people who think impossible, but people couldn't even think of or dream of. So he's able to create ideas, and then create ideas that people think impossible and that people haven't even thought of before even. And he's able to execute them and make them reality. So for all those reasons and more, I think he would be definitely one of those individuals that I'd like to meet in real life. Another individual would probably be one of the polymaths of the past, like someone like Leonardo da Vinci or others, who were able to study all these different areas to a high degree and high level, that a person nowadays, for example, would be grateful to have even been an expert in one area, for example. Like if one person had like the artistic skill of Leonardo da Vinci, they'd be happy if they could just draw like him, for example. But he was actually able to create, architecture and engineering structure. So that required an understanding of, the science and mechanics of things that, and other polymaths of that era, the Renaissance, other eras, they're able to study all these different things to high degree and high level. And I like to kind of, use them as motivators for myself to try and improve my life, but being able to talk to them directly in the past, like Leonardo da Vinci or others, would be a great benefit. The third would be more of an Islamic hero, the Prophet Muhammad, and because actually he was a polymath himself, so he would fulfill that polymath kind of role. But on the spiritual side of things, I think he would be a great person to talk to about life and things like that. And then on the polymath side of things, he was a great leader, and he was very knowledgeable in many aspects. He was a leader not just of communities, but of individuals, of family, of a lot of different things. And so I think his perspectives would be very valuable. So all these different individuals I feel are very accomplished and excelled in many areas. And I think they're motivators to me to kind of improve myself in my life and strive to be great in various aspects of everything that I do.
Uh, uh, After listening to you, you come off more as a generalist than someone who would specialize in one field. That's why I think it makes sense that you went into family medicine. Am I right with saying that?
Oh yeah, that's one of the reasons I want to do family medicine. And I think family medicine allows me to also do consulting with like a tech startup or other things like that. It allows me to do like medical education, for example, because I'm knowledgeable about different areas of medicine. So I think, yeah, one of the big areas or reasons for me to go into family medicine is because I have that breadth of knowledge. If I go into that field, for example, and I have that breadth of care, and I am able to do a lot of different things in medicine and outside of medicine, and I'd like to ideally be a generalist and then specialize in a couple things, which is very difficult, because people are just trying to specialize in one thing. But, I'm trying to kind of chase that kind of polymath type of thing, and even in and outside of medicine. So family medicine is, I feel like a perfect fit for me.
Moving on, Adnan, where is the best place people can find you?
Okay, so well, I have a couple things that I'm kind of working through. I think you probably found me on my YouTube channel. It's just Adnan A. You can type it into YouTube. If you type in Adnan A specialty interviews or something, I don't know if you'll include a link, but you can find me on there. My Instagram page is Adnan's Life. You can message me whenever you want for pre-med questions or anything else. I have an art page, art by Adnan as well. And I have a couple other things like TikTok, but those are cringy, so you probably don't want to watch. But yeah, mainly YouTube, Instagram, and if you want to message me through any of those, feel free. I'm always open to questions for pre-meds or any other individuals.
So I'm just curious, uh, what what made you accept my request for a podcast? I This is a pretty cold DM, right?
Yeah, well, I liked how you had a voice memo as the ask. That was nice. But overall, I don't know. I'm always down to try and help people with whatever kind of project that they're on, especially if it's like a positive thing, helpful to people. And I think this is one of those projects that was helpful to individuals. And I briefly looked through some of your previous podcasts, and it seemed I just skimmed them, and then it seemed like you were trying to do something helpful to the community, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity for me to kind of help however I could. Fortunately, I have some time off now, so I was like, why not write's better than me just being selfish with my time and doing my personal projects. I could help someone else, help other people. So I thought it was a good opportunity for that, and I'm appreciative of you inviting me.
That's so nice of you. So people listening and watching, this brings us to the end of the interview. I hope you took some value out of this, and I know I did. And until then, you guys know what to do. Stay blessed and keep taking action, and we'll see you in the next one.